what's up guys? Welcome back to another video. So good to have you. So I thought it would be kind of cool to show you guys what I've been up to and how I've been practicing drawing characters for my animation. After seeing my short, I noticed that a skill I was really lacking was the ability to render my characters proportionally. They were like very boxy, a little clunky, and I wanted to explore my style a bit because I feel like there's a lot of like untapped potential there that I haven't like really gotten into yet. So I started off by looking through my camera roll and finding really cool pictures of my friends. And I was looking for something that was challenging yet really fun to draw at the same time. Also, I encourage that you guys try to do this too. It's really fun. But yeah, after picking out a reference photo, I started off with a rough blocking out of the character. I'm trying to focus on the underlying shapes inside the body, and I don't worry too much on all the details like folds of the skin and, just stuff like that. You just figure out the pose. And if you're doing digital and you're having a hard time figuring out the pose, import your photo into whatever software you're using and then draw over it. Just keep drawing over it a couple times using three-dimensional shapes in perspective. Keep doing it over and over until you memorize those shapes, and then draw them with your reference on the side, so you're not like tracing. Then, once you figure out the pose using shapes, I start a rough sketch. In this rough sketch, I just try to get things more proportional. I make sure that the main parts of the body, like the arms, the legs, and the head, are all looking right. And what I mean by that is I make sure that the legs are planted on the floor, and I make sure that the characters look like they're standing. I also try to make sure that the arms, as they're most often doing something or dictating action, or they're just doing something, I make sure that they connect seamlessly to the body, and then I make sure that the head and neck look normal as well, and that the head is also kind of like, in one of the views, like either the straight on view, quarter view, side view. I make sure that it's near one of those and that I can perfect it later. And so I keep this sketch a little rough, and I also make sure that certain landmarks line up with each other. Landmarks in drawings are something that help me kind of like draw when I'm drawing from reference. And I can go into more detail about this in another video, but in short, it's where I look for a certain part of the body and make sure that it lines up with other parts of the body. So for example, something I can think of for this one is like, do the feet go past the head vertically? Does the elbow line up with the knee? Do the shoulders line up with the heels? And I keep asking myself these questions and comparing it to the reference. And that really helps me, it really helps me keep things in proportion. Like genuinely, doing that helps out a lot. Then, once I finish this rough sketch, I start moving on to a more refined sketch. In this phase, I start to add more curves to the lines and body parts that, have curves, and I start to add details and folds to the clothes. And I also begin to add details to the face, like the shape of the eyes, the eyelashes for the gals, and then the pupils, which can also be a little tricky sometimes. Do you guys have that problem, by the way, making eyes look forward without them being cross-eyed? It's kind of hard, huh? But anyways, I also like to add the details and shapes of the hair and decide whether or not it covers part of the face. And sometimes I do this on a separate layer just so, I don't mess up what's going on underneath. But yeah, I try to get as close as possible to what the line art would look like. And then once I get it looking pretty good, I move on to the line art phase. When I start the line art phase, I'm personally a fan of brushes that have like a grainy texture to them. I'm not a fan of the brushes that are super smooth and they almost look like vector lines, I guess they're super clean. And I mean, you have to use brushes like that for animation, and I understand that, but if it's just kind of like something like concept art or like this illustration kind of thing, texture brushes, oh my god, that's a hard word to say. I all the time, I love them. I use them so much, they're so cool. In Photoshop, I use the classic Cartoonist. I think it's by Kyle. It's one of the Kyle brush set things or something like that, I don't know. And for Procreate users, I use the Mercury brush. Although it's not really the best, I don't like it more than the Cartoonist one, and I'm still looking for something a little better. So I'm on the hunt for a new line art brush in Procreate. But anyways, as I'm doing the line art, I try to make sure that all the lines in the face are kind of thin, and the smaller details I also make sure are pretty thin as well, so there's a little bit of variation. And then I make the line art fairly consistent everywhere else. It's kind of a thin line for the first pass. And lately I've been experimenting with heavier lines. I kind of like the look of you know, like season 1 Attack on Titan, where the lines were like super thick on the characters. And there's also this artist that I follow on Instagram, and he usually uses like bold lines in his drawings. And yeah, I don't know, I'm a huge fan of that. I really like the aesthetic that has. So I'm, you know, just experimenting and playing around with that. And so what I've been doing is going over the outline on a separate layer and pressing a little harder and adding a thick line all around the outside of the character, not really going inside. However, that's also been a good way to hurt my hand. So I take the line art layer, I add it under everything, and then I add a stroke to it. And I do it that way instead, and it saves a ton of time. My hand does not hurt, and it looks pretty good, you know, for being like, I guess, generated. It looks fine. It's good. And yeah, once I've done that, usually by this time about an hour has already passed, and I'm just saying this just to like track my personal progress, and so that I can roughly estimate how long it takes me to get a sketch going. But don't you dare compare yourself to me and think that you have to get your sketch done in an hour. Like, take your time and make sure that you're happy with your sketch, because that's what really makes the line art pop. And it's also where you can make more mistakes and be more free with changing your ideas if you have any. But yeah, no, take as long as you need to make the sketch good. Don't rush, and keep having fun. Don't feel like you need to hit the line art stage by an hour or something like that. Like, no. Anyways, once the line art is finished, I move on to color. Now, when I was in school, I'd see a lot of people doing this, where they would color inside the lines and they would take up so much time. I've even seen one of my professors do this on Twitch, where he was just coloring inside the lines with like no clipping mat. I was like, yo, this is taking way too long. So let me show you guys what I do. First, I select the line art layer, and then I get the magic wand tool, and I click outside of the line work. Then on a blank layer below it, I inverse the selection. I contract it by maybe a pixel or two, depending on how thick or thin I made the line. And then I add a blank layer underneath the line art, and I fill it in with any color. Typically it's gray. I choose gray because it's easier for me, but literally any color will do. Then I make a layer above that layer that I just filled, and then I pretty much just start coloring. I start coloring all over the character. I like to do the skin tones first and kind of just like blob in the areas, but I don't really care if they go outside the lines of like the silhouette of the character. I don't know. I just like getting really messy with it and kind of getting carefree, because I know that it'll get cleaned up when you make it a clipping mask. But you can just make it a clipping mask for now if you want. I just find it more satisfying to do it after the color. But yeah, for the color, I'm also just using flat colors. I'm not doing anything fancy. I'm not blending them. None of that. And then once I finish all of the flat colors, I make another clipping mask above the one that I just made, and then I make it a multiply layer or an overlay layer, and I lower the opacity a bit. Oh my god, I'm stuttering. I'm trying to get this all in one take. I then use this layer to create and carve out shadows onto the character, and then once that's done, I kind of feel like my characters should... Well, some of them. I want some of them to have tattoos. Some of the artists that I have been watching tend to put tattoos on their characters, and I wanted to try it out. I really like how it looks. I like the aesthetic, and honestly, the person that I'm referencing in this photo, a dear friend of mine, she has a ton of tattoos, so it is kind of fitting. But yeah, I think they look pretty alright. And then another thing I try every now and then, it's a secret little tip that I got from KSM, and he kind of like, you know, said it on one of his streams, and it's a very subtle effect, but I don't know, I kind of like it. So you get a very light, soft brush, you lower its opacity to something very low, and then you put it on an overlay layer or a screen layer, and then just very carefully brush over your character with that brush. Oh god, brush over your character, and then give it some interesting, like, I don't know, give it like an interesting color, and it makes this very interesting like gradation or like a gradient on the character. I don't know how to describe it, but it just looks really nice, and it kind of like makes the color pop a bit more. And I'm actually kind of surprised that I forgot to record myself doing this. You know, I did this step, but I just didn't catch myself recording it, and I also didn't add myself putting in the cast shadow. But aside from that, that's pretty much my finished character. And I do that for a lot of my characters. I kind of, you guys may have seen in like my other videos, I've been drawing the same friend in a red dress and doing these studies and stuff like that. And that's basically how I go about approaching drawing a character like this. But yeah, you can of course experiment, try this out for yourself, see if you know, this improves your workflow a bit, or your coloring. You know, coloring the character, it didn't take too long. It took a little bit. It took maybe about 45 minutes, which, you know, brings the total time I spent on this illustration to like an hour and 45 minutes, which isn't too bad. And I'm actually starting to get a little quicker with it, so that's kind of cool. But yeah, see if it, you know, helps your workflow. It definitely kind of solidifying my way of creating these characters. I notice it's become more efficient, and now that I have it down to a system, my workflow is very good right now, I guess you can say. But yeah, anyways, that's all I have for you guys today. Thanks for stopping by for another video. And yeah, I mean, let me know if this helped you out. I'd love to hear what you guys are up to in the comments. And yeah, if you have any questions about how I make these characters, or if you guys want a more in-depth, I guess maybe tutorial of how I do things, or maybe a slower version or something, I mean, yeah, just let me know. Alrighty, well, I'll see y'all later, homies.